Thank you. I hope that this time it's working. Just as you've heard from Professor Jamros, I want to talk you briefly through selected information from a project which we ran for the Ministry of Infrastructure, and it's about developing a series of new guidelines. What we set up was a major consortium involving the universities of technology from Gdańsk, Kraków, Wrocław, and the Transport Institute from Warsaw. But when we first began the task, when we first began it, there were a few questions. The degree to which it's possible to build roads guaranteed to be safe. What measures can we use to design safe roads? And also, should we just modify the existing regulations, or perhaps we should develop new regulations as a whole? And what new elements of road safety research should be incorporated into the new guidelines? I think it's what this says is pretty obvious, so I don't want to spend too much time about this. Obviously, we cannot talk about fully safe roads. If that were to happen, we would have to eliminate the human role. But we can talk about potentially safe roads. So how do you create potentially safe roads so that they meet other requirements of people and vehicles? But we also have engineering practice and some limitations. As a result, we cannot always build a fully safe road. So the question is, what do we do if we are unable to tick all the boxes and meet all the criteria? So the general assumptions regarding road safety in the new standards, the new design standards. Number one, standards should be defined to ensure that they have requirements for potentially safe roads. But also, if we cannot meet all of the requirements, what compensation measures should we use? And number three, and it sounds pretty obvious, which is that technical standards cannot possibly include all of the road safety design details. That leads to a bit of a problem. This means that we have to build on engineering knowledge and design knowledge. And finally, I think we know it from the literature and from our experience, which is that we have to be able to combine all of these elements skillfully, which would be users and engineering knowledge. Now, how to design potentially safe roads? We combine these things. When we have, obviously, we want to have new standards and new regulations, but we want to build on the technical knowledge and expertise of engineers, and we'd like to use road traffic management tools such as inspections or audits. And there are also other regulations. The question could be, why would we want to modify the technical standards in the first place? Especially because we've had the experience, we've been gathering it over the years. We're short on time, so I cannot talk you through all the knowledge, but we definitely know a lot about the human expectations. But what changes are user expectations. The road is seen more as a public space, which means that there are different expectations on how to use it. Costs are becoming increasingly more important when it comes to life cycle costs. Plus, there are new technologies that we can use for road construction, but we also have ITS. And it's a great opportunity to include ITS for road operation and management. But these elements should be there early on when we first design roads, so it should be part of the technical standards. Plus, there are some additional impulses for change. It's not that we feel we're forced to do it, but at least it suggests that there's a real need for change of the standards. The standards we have discourage designers from using non-typical solutions, because if you want to do something that's non-standard, then the bureaucracy is very tedious. But then again, we get requests for deviations from technical standards because people look for cheaper solutions, which aren't always better, but they are cheaper. On top of that, we know that normative regulations couldn't possibly describe all the conditions. And there is one more element, which is that way too often the regulations we build are based on negative experience, like this is not working, let's change this in the regulations. However, what is missing is for the modern day technical standards to be proactive, and most of them are reactive. So, moving on to our task. What we began with was an assessment of the current design regulations. So what we did is we ran user surveys, and then we conducted an expert assessment of major projects selected at random, and then we assessed existing regulations. So what are the conclusions? And this is a set of conclusions shared by the authors and by the ministry. What we don't want is to just correct or adjust the regulations, and instead we should introduce a multi-level structure of regulations or technical standards. Now, quickly, what does it mean, multi-level structure of regulations? Level 1, that's acts of generally applicable law, something that has to be adhered to rigorously. So this means acts of law and ordinances. And then level 2, these are documents recommended by ministers for transport and others, while this includes certain templates and standards and patterns. And this has to be in line with the general regulations. And then level 3, with all sorts of additional knowledge, including acts of local law. So having these different levels means that we have to open up to innovation, and we cannot over-regulate certain elements. Standards and recommendations support technical knowledge, and level 3 is clearly about supporting the technical knowledge of engineers. But yes, there are some consequences, because in this case, engineers have to take more responsibility for the end product. As a result, the new guidelines have to provide more support than they did before. With Mr. Puczaj, who represents the ministry, we are the co-authors of this, and what you see is a set of guidelines at level 2 designed to support level 1, which is mandatory. So we have guidelines for the investment process, for sections of network, for sections, and the rest, as you can see. But In fact, it's a much broader set of guidelines than before, which means a new quality, a new dimension. And we will be providing recommendations, something we didn't do before. We will have a more detailed discussion of the guidelines tomorrow, so I'll stop there. But, well, let's take this example, junctions and interchanges. This really involves 6 separate documents. What are the directions? How do we want to change the design standards? Definitely, the roads should be self-explanatory. The design speed should be linked to road user expectations, so it will be the design, the speed to be designed, and speed management could be already included in the design phase. When it comes to junctions and interchanges, we have to be clear about how they should be used by different types of vehicles. Plus, we have a wider scope of requirements regarding visibility on roads, junctions, and interchanges. There are some additional elements here as well. Roadside comes to the fore, so safe roadside in place of safety barriers. A better match between infrastructure and the needs of road users, and we have a series of guidelines to cover that. Streets to be treated as an element of public space, and they should meet the expectations of local communities. New types of junctions, such as turbo or roundabouts. And there may be some local difficulties, and if that happens, then the regulations should provide for more flexibility in the design. However, basic requirements have to be met anyway. In this short presentation, I couldn't possibly cover everything, so it was just meant as an introduction into a more detailed discussion tomorrow. But just to give you some conclusion, the proposed change to the technical and construction regulations is necessary, and it meets the modern trends. And we are sure that with the new guidelines, Poland will be able to build a safer infrastructure. What's really important is that the recommended design guidelines do not exclude innovation, where it better meets the needs of road users under specific circumstances. And the design guidelines, as they will be presented tomorrow, are now ready for a round of consultations, technical consultations. It's important to get everyone's input and make any changes as a result. And finally, I think it's key to this. Well, we've had different opinions, but we think that the new regulations are formulated in a way that will make designers more responsible or accountable for how they take their decisions. So it's not just responsibility for specific solutions, it's a responsibility for the whole process. So you give them more freedom, but what we don't want them to do is to look for the cheapest and simplest solutions, because as such, that would limit the efficiency and safety of infrastructure. There is some risk in it, but I hope that when we finalize the documents, once we've had the consultation, I hope we'll be able to achieve this goal as well. Thank you. No.